Hello and welcome to today's painting demonstration. I'm going to show you how to paint this California poppy scene with rolling hills and big oak trees fading into the distance, and then we're going to do a light blue sky with some puffy white clouds. The reference photo, at least the poppy portion of the reference photo, is going to be in the art community Discord. And the links for that are below, as well as the links to my ebook where I fully describe the process and the method and the materials that I use in my paintings. So let's get started. And we're going to get started with a big soft filbert brush and a gold underpainting, which when I run out of this color, I'm going to need a substitute, and I'll let you know what that is when I figure it out. So I've painted a lot of this subject matter, so I'm going to be just shooting from the hip, if you will. I have detailed out where I want my big oak trees, and then vaguely where the hills are going to be. And then I have drawn some interesting poppy shapes in the foreground. This is the only place where the poppies are going to be fully detailed, and then everything else will be very vague as it gets further and further into the distance. You can see that I have a thumbnail with lots of information on it on my sketch pad, and that's going to remind me of things like the direction of light and also where my main masses are going to be for this scene. There's going to be a lot of orange and gold in the flowers, so a lot of that underpainting showing through is going to be very helpful. Light source is going to be the upper left. Kind of a late afternoon vibe. The hills, as they get further away, are going to have more atmosphere between us and them. They're also going to get lighter. The trees on them only slightly darker in value. There will be some slight shadowing underneath the trees, but it's not going to be dramatic. Okay, so I don't have anything marked for my cloud shapes, but if the focal point is going to be this tree, I believe, with the interesting geometric shapes that are cut out here. That's going to be our highest contrast point, and it's close towards the middle. There will probably be the light on this hill meeting this tree. I'll probably add a couple more shapes of interest there. Caught me on the very rare painting where I didn't pick out my focal point in the beginning stages. So since now we know where the focal point is going to be, I can create more lead lines that go there in the sky. So we'll do some really puffy cumulo clouds. And that'll be light sky over to the left. I'm going to darken the value on the edges of the painting to keep our eye inside of as long as possible. Okay, I'm fairly happy with that. Now I'm going to move on to the sky. I'm going to pick up my small filbert. I'm using cerulean blue and titanium white for our sky mixture. And I'll be adding just a little bit of cerulean, or I'm sorry, cadmium yellow to that at the horizon line to make it convincing. The sky gets a little bit more yellow towards the horizon line, especially on blue sky days like this. The tiniest touch. I'll mix it over here on the side so that I have a chance to adjust it before it gets everything all mussed up. There, that is exactly the color that I'm looking for, and I can build up the layers on that as well. The paint is going to dry very, very quickly because we are painting on paper, and then I'm actually on my last piece of paper on this watercolor block. I'm going to build up to super light blue. As you move up from the horizon, you get a little bit more saturated and a little bit darker with your sky color. When I mix paint, you will often see that I'm mixing a gradient so that it's easy to pull changing colors into your scene depending on where you are and where you're adding more paint and where you're layering up also. we go. That's our dark blue. It's going to be in the far corner. Now it's okay if you overlap the areas that you have designated for clouds, because you can just brush the white back when we put titanium white on those fluffy guys. Okay, now as I move towards our sun side of the painting, I'm going to keep it that light color, but not the light blue with the yellow in it. Yeah, that's reserved for the horizon. Now, as the paint on the right is drying, you can see where you need to add a little bit more, another coat, and just vary the brush strokes so that it deepens the color. This will make your gradient look a lot more smooth. This is all still wet, so I'm just going to leave that alone. Wipe off that blue, and then I'm afraid I ran out of wipe. Get some fresh, clean white. So I'm going to put the lights of the clouds in first, and then I can add some shadows later. I'm using the side of the filbert brush to create interesting brush strokes. Now you can overlap the area of the sky and also go under a little bit to reveal that gold underpainting. It's going to give you some different dimensionality to your clouds. And also you can put in some wispies at this time, or you can really add them at any time. That's just fine. I'm using just dry brushing to add little wispy cloud shapes. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with the sky, the buildup of color, the transitions, the brushwork. I'm happy with all that. So now I'm gonna need to mix some colors for our background. That's cerulean blue. I'm gonna drag some of the gold over to make a nice blue-green. I want it to be more on the blue side than on the orange-green side. So I'm going to keep on mixing until I get something that I like. I do want it to look way back in the distance, which is why I grabbed the cerulean blue with the white in it. We're mostly going to be working from back to front on this piece. I'm going to be leaving areas of underpainting where the big masses of poppies are going to be. I feel like that's the color that I'm going for. Now, acrylic paints will dry a little bit different based on if they're a shade or a tint. Tints have white added and they will dry a little bit darker, whereas shades are on the darker side of things and they will dry a little bit lighter than what you see in your palette. It's just another thing to complicate you up. You could also just not worry about it and then wonder, but you'll notice it. You will notice. Especially when using a wet palette and all this paint over here is nice and wet, and then you see stuff drying and you're like, what's going on? That doesn't look like that color. That's what's going on. Okay, so I'm gonna use just the cerulean blue and a touch of that gold again to get a darker version of this blue-green. This is going to be for the mid-range trees and field. I think with the field what I'll do is I'll add just a hair of yellow to brighten it up. It's going to catch the light different, and it's also made of a different material. And then the last version of the blue-green is going to be with the ultramarine blue. And then a hit of that gold, and that's going to be really, really dark. the darkest. Let's see if we can get away with just that. Those are some pretty small shapes, but they're really vague and mushy, so I think I can just go ahead and use the filbert brush the same one that I used in the sky. Just adding a hair more white, blue to my brush since it's there. It's much lighter to go darker than it is to lighten stuff up. And I'm just gonna gently touch it on the sky edge of our tree areas, and it's okay if you show a little bit of underpainting here. It'll just give it a little bit of dimension and glow. We are going to be negative painting some bird or sky holes into these trees, all the different sets. These ones will actually have sky being revealed, where the other ones will have different shades of green. Just adding a little bit more paint inset from the skyline. Great. Now I'm going to touch the cadmium yellow light, bring it over to the edge of that super light sagey green. A little bit more white, I think. Get that color really, really light. And I'm just scrubbing it onto that distant mountain there. It's okay if you overlap the other spaces in your painting as long as they're down. We're going to be painting from back to front. Doesn't matter too much if you miss a little bit. Get a little bit more green down at the bottom of that hill shape, and I think actually that's going to look really nice. Now I'm bringing that yellow to the next darker sage. For the top of the next hill. It's just a little bit darker. than the last one. You don't need the line to pull too much attention, but you do need it to be noticeably darker than the background one. And this is a good time to check in with yourself and remember where the shapes are for your masses of flowers. Now, it's not the end of the world if you paint over them in the midground of this painting. You can just go back. They're so vague in this area. It's not too big of a deal. I'm going to make sure that the hill behind this foreground tree is a little bit lighter. Let's just call it luck that this grass is lighter behind our main contributor to the focal point. That's all going to need another coat of paint. I'm going to start keeping my my brush strokes really horizontal in this area because I'm trying to convey different types of grasses that are on this hillside. If you notice that your paint is getting scrubbed up by the pressure that you're putting on your paper, then try revisiting that spot again later. Give that paint an opportunity to dry. And I do it frequently, so don't feel too bad about that. Okay, next group of trees, a little bit darker. I have some trunks drawn for those guys, but I think I'm gonna just improvise them. I'm adding very bright yellow green up against the side of this big oak tree because I'm going to make an area of very high contrast, and that's going to be high interest for our painting. Also, as I am solidly in the midground, I'm up against these foreground flowers, and I'm gonna want to avoid getting green on them. I'm gonna just go generally around them, and then I will dress them momentarily. It's gonna be pretty dark green around them on the bottom. I'm gonna need to switch brushes for that. This will all be pretty darn dark green down in here, continuing up into this tree. You're not gonna be able to discern the difference between this tree foliage and the grasses down here in the corner of the painting, making these flowers really pop. They're really going to come out at you. Alright, I'm putting away that filbert brush. I think that's about as far as we can go on filbert brushes for this one. I'm going to switch over to a script brush and I'm going to detail out all these branches on this foreground tree. And then we can worry about the color of these poppies here. I'm going to grab this number 2 point brush to assist in the blending of colors on this tree, because what I've done is I've used a lighter color on the top foliage and then graded it down to a darker color. So I want to make sure that those blends are at least similar to what's already going on. And you know, just to be interesting, on the color, I'm going to add some ultramarine blue down in the most shadowed areas and just blend that back up into the dark green. It's going to be subtle, but I think really nice layer of color. Just add it in a couple places so that it belongs. I almost kept on negative painting around those poppies, but then remembered we were going to put some color on them first before cutting in the edges, because that'll make them look a lot more sharp. So it's pretty simple. Just cadmium yellow and then cadmium red. That's going to give us a nice bright orange. That is that. This is where I think I will use the reference photo. The blooms are a little bit lighter on the top edge, the sun side edge, than they are on the rest of the petal. Poppy shapes are pretty simple. I didn't follow the image too closely, just generally. They kind of have a upside down skirt appearance to me. Now, while that light orange is still pretty wet, I'm going to try to get the darker orange in there, and I'm going to use brush strokes that go along with the form of the petal. And drag the dark orange color into the highlighted edge. Okay, going back to the bright orange, and I'm just gonna drag a couple more stripes coming down the petal, and then we're gonna call that good. And I'm gonna cut around those flowers with the darker greens in this same small brush. I know it seems tedious, but I think it's gonna be worth it. Now, as for the stems and the petals, I'm gonna paint those over everything, so I don't have to worry about that too much. That'll just get painted over with this green. I'm running out of that sagey green. I'm gonna have to remix it. It doesn't happen too often. I really am using it a lot. And those darker colors, when you're going for a dark opaque color, you more than likely you're going to need to double that up, possibly even triple. Depends. That'll probably do. You don't have to worry about being super exact. You can just blend back into things. With your new color. All right, I'm gonna resume painting around these poppies, which I think they're gonna look really lovely. I think you're gonna be happy with how this looks. And then we're gonna add poppy shapes. As soon as all this grass, the texture of the grass is in, and I make that a little bit sharper of a line, because that's a really important lead line. Then the poppy colors throughout the hills are gonna be really nice, a really nice addition. Okay, so I've added a lot of texture to the midground grass, and then I made sure that it was more vague on the background hills. Similar texture, not quite as bright because it's not leading us to the focal point, which is going to be the negative space in that tree, the lit grass behind the tree. And then I added some bigger grass brush strokes to the foreground, although I don't want them to pull too much. Now I'm going to go back to the script brush because I'm going to be adding some stems for the poppies. They're going to get a mid-range green because they are on that dark, shadowy green color. And if I'm not getting enough pop, then I will add a little bit of white to it. So we'll just see. I'm not going to drag their stems off the page, just to a point as if they are disappearing into the foreground grass. Then I'm going to make some vague poppy foliage. Little funny, these really delicate, they're delicate poppy leaves, if you will. If you could call them that. Okay, so I'm going to pick up that number 2 point brush. We used it earlier. And I'm going to take that orange that we mixed, the orange gradient. I'm going to start with the light orange. And the areas that you've designated for these flowers, go ahead and get the sun side edge. Don't do it in one consistent brush stroke, kind of scribble it around a little bit, like dot it off the sides of your designated space. These flowers do happen in masses, but they also trail off the edges, and it's gonna set them in the scene better. They're gonna look more at home there. And the further you go back, the smaller and lighter and more vague these flower mass shapes can be. You can just gently drag the paintbrush in the direction of the grass clumps. And as you go further back, just lighten that color up. You can put a little bit on the most distant hill as well. Just don't go crazy back there. Okay, so that front one is in full shadow, that front clump. I'm gonna wait for this darker orange. So yes, pick up a darker orange and put it in the clumps away from the sun, but just the major clumps. Maybe trailing off just a little bit, not majorly though. If you're going to trail it off, make sure to put it on the shadow side. And not as many of them. You can put this darker color in the shadow of some of those trees. That works too. In the midground, I'm giving some of those independent blossoms a little bit of darker orange. And maybe a couple of big brush strokes for these foreground poppies, just for definition. Very good. Okay, this shadow poppy color, it's going to go on this giant chonk right here, this foreground chonk. I'm definitely going to make sure to trail off of this clump. Darkest poppy color will go here. As this paint dries, it will get darker. These flowers are quite a bit bigger than the ones in the midground, so you can make them as such. Just adding a little bit of lighter orange touch right where it seems that the shadow would be dissipating, about here. I'm going to bring some foreground grass over those. I'm going to wait for all of that to dry first, and that's okay because there's another place we need to be, and that's cutting negative shapes into our furthest trees. These little distant broccolis out there. That's what they look like to me right now, is distant broccoli. I have a number 1 point brush right here that might work for this job. I'm going to be using white for the negative shapes in the most distant trees. And so I'm going to clump these sky holes in groups of 3 and 5. I'm going to try not to be too uniform with it because otherwise it looks strange. I don't know how else to describe that, but I prefer clumped sky holes. You can pick a couple of your favorite sky holes and just add another brighter shade, or if you were just using white before, then another layer, another quick layer to not all of them, just your favorites, and that will define them more. This next layer is going to be with green, and also the shapes are going to be a bit bigger, and there's probably going to be less of them. I also feel like I'm going to define some trunk shapes a little bit, and I may even incorporate some poppy orange into this side. So let's just see how that comes together. I'll just shooting from the hip on this one. There is not a lot of reference photo to be had at all. You know, I'm going to start with those poppies, the poppy negative shape, just because if I don't do it now, I'm afraid I might forget. And it is an interesting thought. There we go. Now the bigger shapes. Okay, so I faded the edge of this tree, which I feel like looks really nice. I'm gonna keep that in, maybe bring it up a little bit. And I softened it up down here at the bottom. And then I made some big trunk shapes, which I feel like are really interesting, but I kept them away from the very edge of the painting so they don't lead your eye off. And now for some negative shapes in our main tree. Keep in mind our focal point is the lit grasses behind here, but I might make a few more what will be bright yellow shapes that support the interest right there. Okay, that's it for the bright green. Now I'm going to cut in the edge and make it a little bit more interesting. That's with a much softer color though. There's a lot of gradient behind this main subject, so you're just gonna have to mix and call it as you see it. If it's a little bit off and doesn't connect, if the shape itself does not connect to the background, you have a little bit of wiggle room on the color not being exact, and that would be fine. Little water drop there, didn't hurt anybody. Okay, remember that grass we were talking about in the foreground? I'm gonna drag some of it over that shadowed poppies. And I'm not gonna drag it from the absolute edge of the painting. It's gonna be a little bit in. Okay, I'm gonna add a couple of strands that are a little bit lighter. I'm gonna grab that mid-range green with just a hair of its lighter counterpart. And just a little bit here and there. Every time I step up in lightness, I do fewer and fewer with that color. I'm gonna add a little bit of white on a couple of these poppy stems, the big poppy stems. Not on all of them though. And just a little bit on the leaf, that kind of funky leaf shape. Okay, that looks good. Let's see, do I need to pump up any of that yellow? Maybe like a little tad. Just a little bit thicker paint right on the spot. I really love these shapes that are happening here. Gonna put just a touch of yellow on the very edge of the most light facing big poppy petals. Didn't quite have enough control on my brush to put that paint down, so a little bit of water on there. All right, lovely. It's everything that I hoped it would be. Okay, well, that was fun. You can do a lot with just learning a subject and painting it over and over and over again. Then you can be more inventive with your paintings and your composition. Like, we didn't use any reference for the oak trees. I just paint a lot of oak trees. And just a little bit of reference for the poppies, but it's lovely. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this painting process video, and until next time, happy painting.